And Greg, are you okay with recording?
Absolutely. In fact, I would love to be able to get the link and put it on Facebook and LinkedIn and send it to my network.
We will do that.
Appreciate that, sir. Absolutely.
Welcome everyone to this last Lunch and Learn of 2023. I am thrilled today about our speaker and also our moderator. And I want to give great gratitude to the Crown Automotive Charities and the Hawkins Family Foundation. They have been our sponsors throughout the spring and summer in providing the resources so that we can bring this programming to you. So thank you to the Hawkins family. And now I'd like to introduce Carlos Dinkins, just an amazing human being, a member of the Love for Lawrence Board of Directors, and also an Army combat veteran. Carlos runs the state of Florida for Sazerac, which is the largest North American-based spirits company. So Carlos, I'll turn this over to you now. Thank you so much for being the moderator today.
Thank you, Stoney. I appreciate the kind words. I'm extremely honored to host today's Lunch and Learn with our distinguished guest. I'll start by first acknowledging the gravity of this month, with September being Suicide Prevention Month. You know, it's a time to raise awareness and discuss that highly stigmatized topic. In 2017, we lost our beloved friend Lawrence Dimmitt IV to suicide. His family and friends have come together to promote an open dialogue, destigmatizing the struggle so many have with mental health, and to connect those with resources. So in changing that conversation, it really starts with community, and it's with great pride that I introduce a revered member of a community I grew up in and was actively a part of, and that being the military. Our distinguished guest is retired Major General Gregg Martin. He is a 36-year Army combat veteran and a bipolar survivor and thriver. He commanded an engineer company, battalion, and brigade in combat. He's a former president of the National Defense University, commandant of the Army War College, and commander of Fort Leonard Wood. He is a qualified airborne ranger, engineer soldier, and Army strategist. He holds advanced degrees from MIT with a PhD and 2 masters, the Naval War College and the Army War College, and a bachelor's degree from West Point. So shout out to all my West Point friends that I know that are on. General Martin is the author of Bipolar, General, My Forever War with Mental Illness. He is an ardent mental health advocate, and he lives with his wonderful wife, Maggie, in Cocoa Beach, Florida. Sir, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here and to converse once again. I know after our conversation, I think just a little less than a year ago in Cocoa Beach, I knew that Love for Lawrence and my community of fellow combat veterans needed to hear your amazing story. So I want to thank you for taking the time out and for being with us today.
Well, it's really an honor and a pleasure. And Carlos and Stoney, thank you so much for your leadership in this very important foundation and for everything you do.
I really appreciate that, sir. And like I said, it's really good to see you again. Really good to hear from you. So let's really start. And you know, being from a military community, I know a lot of people know this acronym, but let's start with the BLUF. So what's the bottom line up front of your story, sir?
The bottom line up front is I was born with a bipolar brain, and by about my teenage years, I was living on the bipolar spectrum, which means I had low levels of bipolar disorder, but not the true onset yet. And so my condition is what they call hyperthymia, which means that I had a tremendous amount of energy, drive, enthusiasm, problem-solving skills, creativity, and the like. And so this being on the bipolar spectrum, it helped me and gave me a big advantage all the way from my teenage years into my 40s. And it wasn't until the bipolar disorder got too high back when I was, in my late 40s and 50s, that it actually hurt me and brought me down. And so what do I mean by help? Well, in high school, I had good natural ability, but this hyperthymic personality elevated and boosted my performance. So I was, a star student athlete leader in high school. Then, went to West Point, same thing, graduated near the top of the class. Army Ranger School, did really well. As a junior officer out in the Army, just excelled, all the way through my career, got nothing but, top ratings. During my spare time as a junior officer, I ran 7 marathons under 3 hours within a short period of time. including a 236, would go like on Friday night after a full week of work in the Army. My friends and I would jump in a car, drive to Austria, ski like, lunatics all weekend, drive back, show up on time for PT. And we just did that week after week, just tireless, unbelievable energy and drive. When the Army sent me to grad school at MIT, they said, Martin, your mission is to get a master's in engineering. So I came away with 2 master's degrees and a PhD. And I say that not to boast, but to just give an illustration of the extraordinary energy I had, which came largely from me living on the bipolar spectrum. I'll go ahead and pause there, and then we'll pick it up where I left off.
Yeah, no worries. So I mean, speaking of that, like with being on that spectrum and you saying you had a low level, so you didn't really know it at that time. Can you kind of expand on when you started to understand the onset of bipolar disorder? And then also, how did that affect you during, like, if we can drill down during your career within the military?
So I never thought there was anything wrong with me until all the way to 2014, when I was 58 years old and I was finally diagnosed. What happened is life on the spectrum just kept going up, inching forward, inching upwards, until I actually had a bipolar onset in 2003 during the Iraq War. But a way to think of bipolar disorder in its progression is to think, it's called the kindling effect. And think of when you build a fire. You start with little twigs, then you go to bigger twigs, and then bigger twigs, little sticks, bigger sticks, little log, bigger logs, until, like for me in 2014, which I'll get to, my bipolar disorder was a raging bonfire. So each of those little twigs and sticks and logs are events in my life, experiences with bipolar disorder that kept getting it more intense. So by the time I went from, my teens, where it was fairly low level, to my 20s, which was higher, my 30s higher, by the time I got in my 40s and was, say, a battalion commander in charge of 500 troops as a lieutenant colonel, I was just below the threshold of bipolar disorder. Now, I'm telling you all this in retrospect. I didn't realize any of it at the time because it was such a slow progression. But by the time I was in my 40s, I was pretty darn close to bipolar disorder. And then the game changer was 2003 during the Iraq War. I was a brigade commander in charge of leading thousands of soldiers. And we trained intensively in Germany, then deployed to Kuwait, got the equipment together, trained even more intensively in the deserts of northern Kuwait. And then finally, on March 18th, 2003, we launched the attack to Baghdad. Now, I was in charge of all the combat engineers. We had an absolutely critical mission to provide the mobility and the protection of the attacking armored and mechanized forces to get to Baghdad. And that included, putting in assault float bridges, putting in fixed bridges, building helipads, airfields, fixing and repairing airfields so that, our planes could land, and putting in protective berms for all of our high value targets like Patriot missiles, command and control headquarters. And so the long and the short of it is, once we attacked into Iraq, I felt like this enormous weight was lifted off my shoulders. And that is when my bipolar, my predisposition for bipolar disorder was actually triggered in combat. And it was the thrill, the euphoria, the stress, the trauma of combat all worked inside my mind, where I was making, dozens of life and death decisions throughout the day on unexpected complex problems. And my brain was working incredibly well. I was solving problems so rapidly. I was thinking up creative solutions just, almost instantaneously. It was really extraordinary. I felt invincible, bulletproof, like Superman, didn't need sleep. And so this was my first experience with real mania. Again, unknown, undetected, unrecognized, undiagnosed. When we went home after a year of combat in Iraq, went home to Germany, I then sunk into almost a year-long depression which was really, really hard because depression is just the opposite. What causes your mania is your sick brain, your diseased brain, which is what I have. And that's what bipolar is. It's a disease of the brain inside the wiring of the brain. So my brain decided it wanted to go into mania. And so the way that works is the brain then produces and distributes excess amounts of these powerful chemicals, mainly dopamine, endorphins, and others. And that's what drives you into mania. It's that excess chemical ingredients in the brain. And when the brain decides I've had enough mania and it decides I want to go into depression, the other end of the cycle, what happens is the brain on its own decides, well, I'm going to produce and distribute fewer of these chemicals. And so as the chemical balance goes down, 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 you become depressed. And depressed is you lack energy, you're confused, you're withdrawn, you're indecisive, you lose interest in things that used to interest you. It's really terrible. But 3 times over the next several years, I went to the doctor and said, hey, doctor, I am depressed. There's something wrong with me. My brain's not working right. And all 3 times, when looking at my depression, the doctor said, you're fine, fit for duty, there's nothing wrong with you. But they were dead wrong. What they failed to do was to connect the dots back to how I normally was, which was either a low level of mania or real mania, like in Iraq. So that went on for 11 years, higher highs and lower lows, and the development of psychosis, which is very serious. About half the people with bipolar disorder develop psychosis. And psychosis is a combination of delusions, which is believing things to be true that are not true, and hallucinations, which is seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling things that are not true. They don't actually exist, but you believe they do because of your psychotic brain. So I went higher highs, lower lows. Again, nobody detected it. No one recognized it. And that continued all the way into 2014 after multiple assignments as a general officer, one big prestigious job after another, until I was the president of National Defense University. And that's where my brain, using the kindling theory, burst into a raging bonfire. And my life really changed then. And I'll pause here.
Yeah. So, and speaking of that, and I know when I was reading the book, you're talking about that full blown mania from 2003 to 2014. I kind of want to touch on how your life was affected, mainly in your job, as you continue to get promoted and take these bigger roles. How was that, I guess, full-blown mania, and as it led to the madness, how did that affect you both from a career standpoint and then also from a family standpoint?
So things really changed in spring, summer of 2014 when I burst into full-blown mania. And by full-blown mania, it's really, I went into a state of madness, a state of insanity. I had grandiosity and believed I was an apostle appointed by God to transform the military. I believed I had the keys to world peace. I believed I was the smartest guy in the world. I had paranoid delusions that I was being followed, watched, videotaped, and people were out to get me and get me fired from my job, charged with crimes against the government, put in jail, lose all pay and benefits for my family, and then ultimately murdered in prison. And I really, really believed that. And I had religiosity, which is, just incredibly intense religious beliefs and behaviors. I was probably doing 25 to 30 major religious events per week, everything from multiple Bible studies, multiple prayer breakfasts, discipleship groups, going to multiple church services throughout the week and on the weekends, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe God had really appointed me. I had hallucinations that I could fly. I had hallucinations of devils and demons flying at our house to attack my family. I put Bibles and crucifixes in the windows and doors. And then I saw the demons fly at the house and then do a U-turn and depart. saw the Holy Spirit descend, numerous, numerous times, started spending, large quantities of money without consulting my wife. Um, I started talking faster and faster for longer periods of time, sometimes for hours and hours. I didn't stop talking. Meetings would run way over. I started forgetting events and meetings and just didn't show up because I forgot about them. Stopped doing paperwork, would go oftentimes to work with my gym clothes on. And when people would challenge me, I'd say, hey, I get paid to think and I can think better in gym clothes. And this went on for months. I went about 3 months where I had virtually zero sleep. And at night I would do, just incredible numbers of emails and text messages at night. And I would CC the whole world. I would put hundreds of people on the messages because I was trying to build a network of networks to establish this idea of world peace that I had in mind. I had flights of ideas where I had so many ideas coming so fast and furious that my own brain could barely keep up with the number of ideas that were coming, and nobody else could possibly keep up with it. So those are kind of the examples of full-blown mania. I started acting really bizarre, pretty crazy. I'd go into classrooms and lecture halls and take over, and often in gym clothes. And, I would take over the class or the lecture hall and start giving my opinions and my philosophy for world peace and the role of National Defense University in creating world peace. I had this idea called Global Security University that would network the whole world together using schools, militaries, universities, corporations, and that we could solve and work through problems before a war started. And so that's what the state that I was in. And remember, I said nobody recognized or saw or understood that I was in a state of bipolarity. Well, it changed in full-blown mania. It changed big time. People saw that I was acting over the top, out of control, bizarre. And so what people started doing is writing articles for Tom Ricks. And he wrote these scathing articles basically saying that I was, nuts and that my ideas at NDU were crazy. And then they started putting in, and when those didn't have any effect, then they started sending anonymous statements and reports to my boss, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying, here's what we're seeing in Martin. And essentially it read like the symptoms out of a psychiatric manual. And so the chairman did some assessments and investigation, and he came to the conclusion that he needed to pull me out of NDU and replace me for the good of the university and for my good. And the way that went down was I got a call on a Friday afternoon in July, and it said, report to the chairman's office Monday morning at 10. So I did. And I didn't know whether I was so manic, so high, and I still didn't see anything wrong with me or my behavior, didn't think I had any kind of mental illness. I reported in to the chairman, and he said, Greg, I love you like a brother. Your performance has been incredible. I give you an A+ for a grade on your job performance. However, your time at National Defense University is over. You have until 5 p.m. today to resign, or I will fire you. And, oh, by the way, I'm ordering you to go get a mental health exam this week at Walter Reed. Well, you would think that I was disappointed because I didn't know if I was going to get promoted, extended in the job, or fired. Well, when he told me that, I said, thank you, Chairman, gave him a big hug and said, God put me in this job to do great things, and now he's going to put me somewhere else to do even bigger things. And, the chairman looked at me like I was crazy, which I was. But ironically, 9 years later, from 2014 to 2023, I am actually doing bigger, better, more important things with my mental health advocacy, my work with veterans, et cetera. So I got fired, forced to retire earlier than planned, and then later I was hospitalized. But I'll pause there and we'll continue.
Yeah, it really gets to like the part two of the book that you're talking about is like your journal of recovery and that new life. I want to talk a little bit more, dig into something that, later on as in our conversations that we had, which I think is also more significant, is that you talk about your sons living with bipolar. Can you expand on that and what's that's been like?
Yes. So, my bipolar onset when I was 47 back in 2003, unknown, undiagnosed, but my two sons both had bipolar onset when they were teenagers at about 17. Their flavor of bipolar disorder is different than mine. I have bipolar disorder type 1, which is mostly mania and less on the depression side, and oftentimes psychosis, which I had. They both had a lower level, which was more depression with some hypomania, which is a low level of mania. But they were, both, very sick, and it made it very difficult for them. They're both very talented, terrific young men, both in their 30s now. But life has been a continuous struggle. It's been difficult. School has been really hard. Holding a job has been really hard. Relationships with women has been hard. And it's just, that's the nature of having bipolar disorder. I feel fortunate that mine didn't really strike until I was in my 40s, and that's called late onset bipolar. But these two, it hit them as teenagers, which is much more common because most bipolar onset is between the ages of about 17 and 25. So anyway, they're doing okay, but they've also been suicidal most of their life. Where, both of them told me that, almost every day of their life, they wanted to kill themselves. And one of them's an Army veteran. And my wife and I feel lucky that we still have both of them and they're both still alive.
I thank you for sharing that, General. And when we were having our conversations over lunch, I think one of the things that really hit home, as it relates both to Love for Lawrence Foundation, but also as you talked about the story, is I think the phrase that you use was passive suicidal ideations. Within that phrase, like how have they and how have yourself really seek therapy for those?
So my suicidality was passive ideations where I wanted to die. And this is particularly in the next phase of the journey after I got fired from NDU. In fact, I'll just touch on that real quick. After I got fired from NDU, I got 3 mental health exams at Walter Reed. All 3 of them said, fit for duty, nothing wrong. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this guy. And all 3 were dead wrong. And what that did is it fed my paranoid delusion that people really were out to get me, because now I had proof there was nothing wrong with me. And these people who are against the reforms and the transformation of NDU, they purposely brought me down and got me fired. So then I went into a state of bitterness, anger, rage. That continued for a month or so. Then I spiraled and crashed into terrible depression and terrible psychosis. And that's where the idea of passive suicidal ideation started, where I wanted to die. I didn't want to be alive anymore. And I was convinced that that would be the best thing for my family and so forth. And that's where I entered in this terrible, crippling, hopeless depression with terrifying psychosis. I entered what I describe as bipolar hell for 2 full years. And I had endless repeating visions of my own death and dying, either that the people that were against me, they achieved their goal. They got me charged with crimes, convicted, incarcerated, and when in jail, I was beaten and stabbed to death. And then I died gurgling in a pool of my own blood on a cold prison concrete floor. And that went through my mind continuously. The other passive suicidal ideation, but again, I didn't kill myself in that scenario. Somebody else killed me, thus it was passive. The other one, this invisible force, powerful force, would grab me and throw me underneath a rapidly moving 18-wheeler, which would rip my arms and legs off, rip my head off, bloody limbs flying everywhere. And again, I wasn't killing myself. This invisible force was killing myself. And then the invisible force would also steer me into an oncoming truck. And so I had these, really terrifying visions of my own death continuously. But I also did want to die because my life was just horrible. And so those are what is called passive suicidal ideations. And the one who picked those up was the head psychiatrist at the VA. And the VA really did me a favor. They then gave me the opportunity to do inpatient care at a psychiatric ward, which I did for 2 weeks. And then I spent 4 more weeks living in the hospital doing more intense therapy. But so that's what passive suicidal ideations are. The danger is they can morph into active ideations, which is what my 2 sons had. And once you have active ideations, then the next thing is, okay, I want to kill myself. I develop a plan to kill myself. And now I do go pull the trigger or hang or take the pills or whatever, jump off the bridge. So, and that's the active ideations is what my sons had, and I had the passive.
And in getting through that, and obviously, sir, thanks for sharing. But in getting through that, I think you had mentioned some of the medications you were using or you were able to use, and they really helped you. So can you describe like how the therapy helped both you and your sons get through those type of ideations, both either whether it was be passive or whether be active?
Yeah. So when you have a mental illness, bipolar disorder being one of the most serious of all mental illnesses, in order to recover and start living a healthy life again, the first thing you have to do is get your brain chemistry in balance. And for, just I'd say over 99% of people, that means medication. And there are good medications for all these different mental illnesses. There are very good medications for bipolar disorder, but it's difficult to pinpoint for the psychiatrist which medication to use. And oftentimes there's a lot of trial and error. So when I first after I crashed into depression and was still on active duty in 2014, I went to Walter Reed, and the doctor prescribed a whole bunch of different medications. And all they did was make me sleepy and groggy, and they didn't do anything to fix my bipolar disorder. And so I didn't have any luck with them and so that went on for 2 years. No good medication, no good brain balance, until they tried lithium. And lithium is a natural salt that's mined and harvested from the earth. And once I started taking lithium, remember, I had 2 years of bipolar hell in depression and psychosis. My depression lifted within about 3 days. My psychosis lifted within about 3 days. And I reverted to essentially my pre-bipolar self, good brain balance of chemistry, energetic, interested in my old interest like before, enthusiastic, drive, etc. I mean, that was 7 years ago. It still took time for me on my journey of recovery to get where I am today. But it was the beginning. I did a turn in the road and I started getting better. Now, my sons have had less luck with medication. They both tried lithium and it had really, bad side effects for them, and they just couldn't keep taking it. It made them so sick. And they've tried other medications that are more successful. One of my sons is taking a medication called Lamictal, which is very effective for bipolar disorder type 2, which again is mostly depression. My other son is an artist. And like most artists and many people, he really missed his hypomanic highs where he was so energized and creative and, energy. He missed that so badly that he has, been on and off of his medication. And for the most part, he doesn't take it. And so he's putting himself at great risk to go into a much worse bipolar condition. But, that's his choice. Like I said, he's an artist and he wants that creativity, that energy to do his artwork.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, General Martin. Right now, like from where you are, and I know we had talked about this when we were having lunch, You really talked about, you being in Florida and really that healthy living. Can you kind of expand on where you are right now from a healthy living standpoint, and also expand on like what is the life's purpose and mission that you have now?
Yeah, great question, Carlos. So it was 7 years ago. It was late summer, early fall of 2016 that I started taking lithium. And that was the game changer. My wife and I made a strategic decision as well to move to Florida for the brightness, the sunshine, the warmth, which there's scientific evidence that that can really help anybody's balance of, their brain balance, but especially somebody with bipolar disorder or another type of mood disorder. It really is very healthy. So we moved here and then had to, basically rebuild my marriage, rebuild my life, start getting back in shape again, because the 2 years of bipolar hell took a huge toll on my physical health. Just the joints my shoulders got frozen, largely from lack of use. My endurance went way down. My upper body and lower body strength diminished significantly. So I had to start really rebuilding myself physically and mentally. I mean, I was retired. What am I going to do with my life? I know I have a job to do to continue my bipolar recovery, but what else am I going to do? So I started reading books on retirement, which have lots of good ideas, started talking to a couple of different life coaches, and then people like, older people who I respected and trusted, people from church. And so I started working on getting myself back together. And then, I was sort of praying, okay, God, in the Army, I had a mission and it focused me and it gave me purpose. What's my new mission? And over a period of time, I developed my mission. This was a few years ago that, I looked in the mirror and it was kind of like, a vision from God. You're looking at your purpose, what you have been through as an active duty Army guy, as a veteran, as someone who got acutely ill with bipolar disorder, as someone who's now on the road to recovery. You're smart, you're a good writer, you can speak publicly. So start telling or sharing your bipolar story, because if I do, it'll help stop the stigma, promote recovery in other people, and save lives. So, I mean, that is my purpose. It's my mission statement. So everything that, when people want me to do something, or I have decisions to make, or how to use my time, of course, I go to the gym. I have a healthy living pattern, but my big question, my big mission is, sharing my bipolar story by writing, speaking, conferring, in order to stop stigma, promote recovery, save lives. And that's what I've been doing. 3 years ago, I started writing my memoir, which is now it's a published book. It took me about a year to write the memoir. Then it took me about a year to find a publisher, and then a year to get it actually published. I've published about 25 articles that are on my website. I've given probably close to 100 podcasts, interviews, and so things like that. And if you're interested in any of that, most of them are on my website, www.bipolargeneral.com. And so, that's what I do. That's my mission.
I appreciate that, sir. I will tell you that I was able to get the book, and one of the main quotes that really hit home with me was that what you said, your mom, one of the quotes that always stuck with you was, whatever you do, do it with all your heart. And I can tell obviously from just meeting you and in general reading your book and seeing your podcast, is that you're absolutely doing all of this with your heart. Another point, and kind of what I want to do as we get close to wrapping this up, is I want to mention another part of the book that really hits, and I think it hits not just from a military community perspective, but for everyone that is looking to reduce the stigma. Is you shared a section that's called "Seeking Health is a Sign of Strength." So if a person suspects or feels that they or their loved one or colleague is dealing with a mental condition, what do you think they should do?
If someone thinks they have a mental condition, they should go to their doctor and get evaluated. And if the doctor will tell them if they think they're okay and they don't need help, but if they do need help, they're going to get you in to see a psychiatrist who are specially trained to deal with, these conditions, and probably assign a therapist who is also trained to help you deal with your life, with relationships, with questions, with challenges. So I would say go in and get help. Now, most people with a mental condition don't think there's anything wrong with them. Like me, I didn't think there was anything wrong. I thought I was Superman. And so if someone doesn't think there's anything wrong with them, but you as a family member or a friend or as a work colleague, I would say you should go in and have the heart-to-heart talk and say, hey, I love you, like the chairman did with me. He said, hey, I love you, but things are not right. You need to go get a mental health exam. Now, you can't, the chairman was my commander, so he could order me, but you can't order your friends. You have to try to persuade them. And it might take more than you. You maybe have to get some trusted friends and advisors and family members to go in together, say, hey, we really think you need help. What Dempsey did for me is he saved me probably from having a heart attack, possibly a stroke, and he got me out of this pressure cooker job, which was driving me mad, and combined with my bipolar disorder. So I would say go in and get help. The other thing you said, it's a sign of strength to go get help. I totally agree, because the thing that deters people from getting help is the stigma. And the stigma is based on ignorance, because people think that if you have a mental illness, it's your fault, that you have a lack of character, a lack of willpower. You're not trying hard enough. But that's not true. Mental illness is just as physiologically real as diabetes, cancer, heart disease. And there's no stigma against people with those diseases, which are well known to be physical. But we should really treat people with mental illness the same way. And that's one of the reasons I'm speaking up and telling my story. I want people to say, hey, this guy was a general and he had severe mental illness. That wasn't due to character flaws or lack of willpower. I mean, this guy, made it through Ranger School, and, he's got willpower. So I would say it's a sign of strength where you push through and overcome the stigma of shame and embarrassment. I mean, nobody should be ashamed. You're not shamed or embarrassed if you have diabetes, nor should you be if you have depression, bipolar disorder, or any other mental condition.
I appreciate that, General, 100%. To not only the point of seeking it both from when we have something wrong physically with us, but especially when we're wrong mentally, and helping reduce that stigma, not only obviously just in the military, but with all your friends in general, is one of the most important things that I think we can communicate. What would you say is the most important thing that you would like everyone that's here, the audience, to take away from our talk today?
I would say mental illness often results in destroyed marriages, families, and careers. It often leads to addictions, homelessness, incarceration, and then death and suicide. That is a common outcome. People with bipolar disorder are more than 40 times more likely to kill themselves than those without bipolar disorder. So that's terrible. The news is awful. But here's the good news. If you go in and you get professional medical help, there is a very, very good chance of recovery and living a happy, healthy, purposeful life. Very real possibility for that. And once you get stabilized and begin the journey to recovery, which is a never-ending journey. And the reason I named the book, the subtitle, it's Bipolar General, My Forever War with Mental Illness, because it never goes away. I'll always have bipolar. So I have to keep doing the steps to recovery, which are, number one, keep your brain chemistry in balance through medication. Number two, work with a therapist to help you think. Number three, have a healthy lifestyle of good diet, exercise, plenty of sleep, and so forth, low stress. And then fourth, I call the 5 Ps. People. Surround yourself with happy, energetic, fun people. Number 2, get a purpose statement that gives you drive and motivation, serves a cause bigger than yourself. Third, perseverance. You've got to have the will to win. You can't give up because there's setbacks along the road. Fourth is place. Live in a place that enables you to do the things you want to do and is conducive to good health. And then fifth is presence, which is being able to get outside of your own head, your own mind, to think about your own thinking and realize that oftentimes your thoughts and your thinking are not correct. They're not true, and they're leading you astray. So those are what a person needs to do that's on the never-ending journey of recovery.
Thank you for that, General Martin. And to recap that, you said the 5 Ps: people, purpose, perseverance, place, and presence. And we'll definitely get that information out to everyone that has been able to attend. Stony, I'm looking at the time. Would it be, we'll be able to open up for Q&A if possible?
Yes, absolutely. How fascinating was this talk? I wish you weren't I'd like to start all over again, and I will, because we will post the recording on our website so that everyone can listen to it again, and that other people who weren't able to attend today can also listen. We are open for Q&A. If anyone has a question for the General or for Carlos, you're welcome to put that up in either the chat box or the Q&A box. I know as I was taking notes, a couple things that I found that we have in common, General, with Love for Lawrence and with your story. I mean, you are like the poster man for us, because when you said stop stigma, promote recovery, and save lives, in a nutshell, that's our mission at Love for Lawrence. Increasing the conversation around mental health and suicide to stop the stigma, sharing educational opportunities like these lunch and learns to promote recovery, and then also educational opportunities to, as you have given us today, with information that will save lives, because you bring the hope for recovery. I also wrote down when you said seeking health is a sign of strength. Seeking good mental health is a sign of strength. And so I can put in a little plug here for our next big event, which will be January 18th, 2024 at the Dimmitt Family Chevrolet dealership in Clearwater. Our theme that night is Vulnerability Unlocks Strength. So basically what you said, seeking help, being vulnerable, letting people know I need help, I need some assistance. I want to get better with my mental health is a sign of strength and will lead to recovery. So thank you for that.
Amen. That was a great recap.
General, I'm should be in your area, if not next week, the week after that. So I'll reach out to you so we can grab some lunch again.
That would be great. Love to see you, Carlos.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One other thing that you said, and it is, again, the byline or on your book, My Forever War with Mental Illness. And I like to remind people that you can be in recovery with every diagnosable mental illness. You can be in recovery. They're not all curable. As you said, you will always live with bipolar disorder, but you can be in complete recovery with your combination of medication, therapy, your people, your place, your perseverance. So that does bring great hope for people to know that you can be in recovery, just like you can be in recovery and live successfully with a disease like diabetes.
Yes, absolutely. The one thing I didn't mention is when I was in that 2 years of bipolar hell from 2014 to 2016, I had no hope. I wanted to die. I never thought I would get better. And it was a battle buddy from the Army who I had served with, who had a son who had bipolar disorder. And he just kept reaching out to me because I wasn't answering text, email, phone calls. I was just so withdrawn. And he said, Greg, You will recover. I'm telling you, it's gonna happen. Don't give up. And my wife, same way. And I think the power of human connection in generating hope for the person. I mean, so if you have a friend who's severely mentally ill, like I was, this, continuous reaching out, giving hope, giving encouragement, even when there doesn't seem there is any hope, is really critical to our veterans, to all of our people for recovery. Basically inspiring hope.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
And that's
So
what,
we have
that's
a
what we
question.
strive to do at Love for Lawrence. We do have a question. It's a great question. Being military, you may not have encountered this, but the question is, have you encountered any challenges with health insurance coverage?
No, because I am really fortunate and blessed. When I retired, well, when I was on active duty, I had, good military hospitals. They got my diagnosis wrong, but they finally got it right. And so that was covered. Then when I got out of the Army with no continuity of care, which was a big mistake by the military medical people, I did see a civilian provider, and my TRICARE from retired military was accepted. And then finally the VA. And, I've got, for my bipolar disorder, it's 100% disability. So I've got, solid VA coverage. And the VA, I think I would give them pretty good ratings on the mental health stuff dealing with veterans. They're really pretty smart, pretty attuned to it. And so the short answer is I had no problems. I'm really fortunate.
And for our listeners, I can give two suggestions if you are having challenges with your health insurance or seeking medical help for your mental health disorder because of a lack of coverage with insurance. If you're in an emergency situation, you can now call 988 and be connected right away with a mental health professional and someone who can give you assistance. Also, in many communities across the country, you can dial 211. I know here in the Tampa Bay area of Florida, you will get either the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay or Tampa Bay Cares, and your 211 call centers are agencies that can coordinate care across a lot of different levels, perhaps with counseling, free counseling, and therapy for a mental health concern, but also with paying your light bill, food resources, some other things that you may need if you're unable to work because of a physical or mental health condition. So those two numbers for an emergency, 988, and for non-emergency situations and extended care coverage in other areas, 211.
Hey, thank you for sharing that, Stoney. I am okay. I see. See, I got another question. Okay, it says so General says, I heard the General speak of his son, an artist that is currently struggling, and I wanted to let him know that there is a memoir called Marbles, Mania, Depression, Michelangelo, and Me, and it is a graphic memoir by artist Ellen Forney that delves into the author's journey with bipolar disorder. So whoever sent that, I appreciate you for sharing that. But General, I think it's in the Q&A, and I could flip that over to you as well. But
That'd be great.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And I'll feature that book as well as yours, General Martin, on our website.
Okay, great.
loveforlawrence.org.
General, once again, I appreciate your time. It looks like you guys have any more questions. I look forward to seeing you again. And Stoney, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank the General so very much for being so blatantly honest with us today and vulnerable. And I know that our listeners have received a lot of great insight into what you've been through, but also what they may be going through themselves. And one more time, I would like to thank Crown Automotive Charities and the Hawkins Family Foundation for being our sponsors and enabling these Lunch and Learns. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we will start up Lunch and Learns again in the spring of 2024, but we hope to see you all at Reeling in Stigma 4, the next big event for Love for Lawrence on January the 18th, and there's more information about Reeling in Stigma for Vulnerability Unlocks Strength on the Love for Lawrence website, loveforlawrence.org. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your time. Appreciate you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.